The Healing Spring Show, educating and empowering the community by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmondson.
So welcome back, and here we are with Tony Hoffman, and he's got a powerful story to talk about determination, courage, and faith. And we're going to hear from him now. I was telling you this before off camera. I listened to your TED Talk earlier, and it really did touch my heart. And it gave such a sense of hope and ability to really help people see that you can achieve what you want to achieve in this world, if you believe in it. And I want our clients, our alumni, and anyone out there who's listening to get that message. Yeah. Can you get us started? When did this all begin for you?
The Reformation or the whole story?
Maybe the whole story.
I start my story in 6th grade. I was a young man who was very talented at sports. My first dream was basketball. I wanted to go to the NBA. By the time I was in 6th grade, though, I started to, what I would say, display the isms of an addict or an alcoholic. I just wasn't introduced to any kind of substances at that point. I wasn't sexually abused or physically abused. I wouldn't say that I was verbally abused to a certain degree, but I had these isms, and those isms were strongly filled by my ego. And by the time 7th grade had come around, my ego was really destroying my ability to be an athlete because I was uncoachable. I couldn't be taught, I couldn't be corrected, I couldn't be anything because my ego had to be so big that people couldn't find out that I was very soft and broken on the inside. And it took a lot of meditation work to find myself in that state and feel what I was feeling and relive those situations and understand why I was behaving the way I was. But I tell people, compassion and empathy are the two things that foundate my entire being. I'm also driven and passionate and very emotional, but compassion and empathy are probably the strongest parts of my foundation. And so when somebody would correct me, it was very hard for me to be corrected because I didn't want people to know that I had an emotional side where I felt inadequate. And the inadequacy issues were a result of my dad not being able to come to a lot of my basketball games. He made it to the soccer games, he made it to the baseball games, but I didn't want to go to the MLB. I didn't want to go to Major League Soccer or play in Europe or South America for a South American. I wanted to go to the NBA. And so when I was a young kid and I would look into the crowd and I wouldn't see my dad, I would see everybody else's dads. I would start to write this story that everybody else's dads can get here. Why am I not good enough for my dad to get here? And so my ego, based on my emotional side and these inadequacy issues, when I was corrected, I couldn't let them know that I felt like I just wasn't good enough. And so it was really hard too, because at this time, I'm so gifted at sports, but I also have social anxiety, and so it's hard for me to communicate in big groups. I didn't know how to make friends. I never felt comfortable in groups. I never felt like the friends I had were actually my friends, and these were secrets that I kept to myself. And I started to isolate during this, middle school years, and the isolation started to lead to depression, which helped me tie a stronger knot on that inadequacy story that I was writing for myself. And that was when things shifted, 7th grade. I started hating myself.
Can I ask, you said the word ism. Some people know very clearly if they've been in recovery what that might look like. Can you describe some of the isms?
Selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, filled with ego, pride. If a coach told me that I needed to work harder, I would leave practice. I would consider those isms. An alcoholic or an addict gets in a situation with an employer and they're corrected and they quit the job. Instead of just being humbly corrected, they're self-centered, self-seeking, and you can't correct me. I'm not wrong in this situation. Those are the isms that I was carrying, and they were self-destructive. Once I got through my high school years of struggling with these mental health things that I wasn't dealing with at any capacity, I was on my bicycle from the end of 7th grade to my senior year in high school. I gave up my basketball dream. I couldn't be coached. I wasn't good in team environments. My coach told me in 7th grade I was too small to ever play in the NBA, and I just let all of this pressure crack me. Well, I found a bike shortly after I was kicked out of 7th grade for getting a grow marijuana. Part of my ways of dealing with my stuff was acting out in impulsive behaviors. I get kicked out of 7th grade, I get introduced to the BMX bike. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was on the cover of a magazine. I was ranked #1 in the country. I held corporate sponsorships with some of the largest names in action sports, minus Airwalk's not around anymore. But all while this success is happening, I'm struggling on the inside. I still don't feel comfortable. I still have social anxiety. Depression was at an all-time high. I hated getting out of bed. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't like school. And I ultimately didn't like myself. And during that time is the time when I was hanging out with people who started smoking weed and drinking. And, I was the only one that didn't want to do it for a long time. But I think that I judged people. Now I don't judge people that do that stuff. It's not my place. But at that time I judged people, and I think that there was, like an internal mechanism of how me judging other people kind of came back on me. And when I decided that, I'll try it. That's when I found out that the isms and me being an addict, instantly went into play. It was like I told myself I wasn't going to do it. I was only going to do it once, and then it was twice and 3 times, 4 times, and the next thing you know, every day, and that wasn't enough. And then other substances started to come into play, and the one that I found that actually worked was opioid medications, prescription painkillers. And I'm in my 12th year of recovery now. As of May 17th, I have such bad anxiety, and the opioids seem to shut it off. And that's why, the weed made me paranoid, kicked up my anxiety. I smoked crystal meth heavily and shot crystal meth heavily at the end, but that just made me paranoid and full of anxiety. It was like the one thing that could stop me from feeling uncomfortable was the opioid medication. And that's when things just went super downhill from 18 to 23.
And it's amazing because when you're talking about it, I'm guessing people see, I remember looking at those kind of magazines going, wow, I wish I was him. I wish I was living that life. But on the inside, maybe you're wishing you were living that life too, wishing that guy, but you were having anxiety, you were suffering, you were going through this.
Yeah, it's still today. It hasn't changed. I've just learned how to deal with it.
Yeah, still human.
I'm still human.
Yeah.
I'm more successful now than I've ever been in my life. Being on the cover of a magazine now to me is minuscule compared to the things that I've accomplished. Mm-hmm. And yet I could still be facing personal issues that arouse my anxiety, make me want to sit in depression, isolate from people, and stir those things that when I was that young boy, 12, 13 years old, causing me to crumble. Now I've just learned to understand who I am and what makes me different. The one thing that makes me different is I'm an addict and I'll always be an addict, and I'm okay with that now. It's okay for me to be that because it's actually become my greatest gift. As long as I harness what makes me different and use it to give to the world, then I find myself losing anxiety. I find myself not being depressed. I find myself feeling good about who I am. And I think that that's one of the biggest struggles with addicts or alcoholics is how do we find a purpose? How do we create a vision that fulfills us so much that we no longer want to pick up the bottle, we no longer want to pick up a pipe, we no longer want to pop a pill or buy heroin or whatever it is. And for me, it was a spiritual experience that led me to that whole understanding of myself. Right. And I kind of just chased after that. And chasing after that was the greatest decision I've made.
And you just literally rebranded what success looks like for a lot of people out there. When you said that, you have all these great things that's going really well, but you still have anxiety, you still have pain, you still have suffering. Mm-hmm. So all those people who are getting newly sober, or maybe they're in their 3rd or 4th year and they're having a hard time, what I've seen is a lot of times they want to go out and use again. So go, wait, this isn't working. I have anxiety, I have pain, I have suffering, I have something going on. And what you're saying is, guess what? That's part of the deal. But we need to do something about it, and there's a solution. But just because you're feeling experiences, you're still okay.
Yeah. What I think too is it's important to understand that it doesn't matter where you're at in your recovery, you're going to deal with certain things, but it doesn't matter where you're at in your recovery, you have to do certain things. And a lot of times people will tell me, it's not working, it's not working. Well, what are you doing? Are you just going to meetings? Maybe you need to find a therapist. Maybe you need to get plugged into a charity and you need to find yourself giving more. You know, maybe just going to meetings and 12th stepping there is not your total calling. Maybe there's more for you in your life. You need to go out and you need to try things. You need to fail at things, and you need to find that thing that makes your soul spark. But you also need to know that there's an ebb and flow to the universe, and our lives sometimes don't feel great. Doesn't mean it's not working. The best thing I can say is if you start working out, every day you look in the mirror, you will not notice the difference. You won't. Right. I don't care who you are. Just like if you use drugs and you tell yourself nobody knows, and every time you look in the mirror, you don't see that you're different. But everybody else can see that change. So while you think that things aren't actually working, they are at work. It's just your perceived reality of what's working and what's not. Sometimes there's a stillness to working because there's players or things that are happening around us that have to be in a certain position for us to advance. And we have to have patience in those times. That was something I never had. That was something that I developed while I was in prison, because I was in a place where I couldn't leave. I was in a treatment center. It wasn't a treatment center, but it really was an opportunity for me to be still, to listen to myself, to understand my emotions, to understand my behaviors, to understand why I am where I am. Because nothing is by accident. No clients here are here by accident. They're here as a result of their thinking, their choices, and something that makes them different. And until you stop in that stillness, whether it's 3 years or 30 days, you'll never really understand what it is. You have to give yourself a chance. And I have to do it all the time, you know? I mean, the last big time that I had to give myself a chance and just be still and keep doing what the micro process that I talk about in my TED Talk was 2015. My biggest dream, you know, outside of going to the Olympics, was to develop a platform as a national speaker. 2014 went pretty good. I think I did 6 jobs on the road. And then in 2015, I was thinking, well, I'm going to do at least 8, 9, 10. Right. I'm going to advance. I did none. Not one. Not locally, not nationally, nothing. And on the inside, it was like, this isn't working. Like, what do I do from here? Like, I'm trying to create a platform. I'm trying to create a career so I can take care of myself. I'm trying to give to people honestly. It's not about the money, but I'm 29 years old with my mom, living with my mom and dad, and my mom says, son, you need to think about getting a job. And I tell her, you know, I'm trying. Like, it's just not working. Just, you know, things weren't working. But you know what? I had to stop in that moment and take a look at everything as an equation and say, what component in this equation is causing the math problem to not add up right? And I started removing some of those components. I started adding in some different components, and then finally I got the green at the end. In 2016, my speaking popped. I changed my marketing approach. I changed how I was working with things, and it completely flipped everything I did. And ever since 2016, everything has doubled. The one thing I can say is the moment that we feel like quitting is typically the moment right before we're about to be blessed and moved up to a new level. It just depends on whether or not you're going to stop or you're going to keep going. Yeah. You know, so if you're in year 3 and you're saying it's not working, it is. Keep going. You just keep going. The original miracle was to get, you know, 50 days, 60 days, 90 days. The miracle at 3 years is totally different. Sometimes we expect the same thing that we got from our past when that's not really the way life works.
Well, and you started, I want everyone to go watch your TED Talk. So if they're listening, they need to get on YouTube. They look up Tony Hoffman TED Talk. It's life-changing, powerful. It just was such a amazing for me. I don't even have words for that. So I'm hoping everyone looks it up and watches it for sure.
I appreciate that, honestly. Yeah. It's so hard to give a 15-minute speech. And I'm sure if you saw the TED Talk, my way of telling stories and the messaging in the stories is unique. In that I don't use projectors. I'm not a bullet point speaker. The messages that I have are very, very intricately and very intentionally placed. The stories I'm telling are telling and speaking to each person about certain issues and how to deal with them and what we're facing and what we're looking at. And I'm just grateful that people like yourself watch it and are impacted by it.
You started off all of this journey by brushing your teeth. Mm-hmm. Can Can you talk about that? How did you get from brushing your teeth to the Olympics?
So I'm a spiritual person now. My faith is in Christ. I don't push that on anybody. I don't tell anybody that needs to be their power greater than themselves. So as a follower of Christ, as of January 21st, 2007, I was arrested January 22nd, 2007. So I'm now in prison 50 days later. I'm reading in this big book called the Bible, and there's a verse in there that says, if you can be trusted, those who are trusted with little will be trusted with much. And for some reason, I really sat on that verse, and I really tried to ask myself, what is the full meaning of this? You know, because I think that on the surface level, we can undermine the context of what that actually means. And so from there, I said, okay, I can't be trusted with anything. I don't even know how to brush my teeth every single day. I couldn't even sit in a classroom and focus for 45 minutes. I couldn't let a coach tell me how to do something without having an ego fit and throwing a fit and a tantrum. And so I took that verse and I said, this is what's going to take me to the Olympics. I'm going to learn how to brush my teeth every single day, but I'm going to treat it like it's going to the Olympics. And so it was a shift in intention or perspective of what brushing my teeth actually was. It was a very small task, one that most people don't even think about because it's a habit. It becomes a part of who they are. It's no longer a choice. For me, it was a choice at 23 years old in a California penitentiary cell. That choice now was to determine, I could determine in that choice how I thought about it. And so when I started to create the habit of brushing my teeth as a process to the Olympics, there was an urgency to why I had to do that. And then once I mastered that and it became a habit, then I mastered the art of making my bed with the same type of intention, with the same type of urgency, that these small decisions and being trusted with these small items were eventually going to graduate themselves into these very big items. And I would be able to hold those items and care for them. Some people may get frustrated that I'm as successful financially as I am now because of my business adventures and things that I've built, but they don't understand why I might like fashion and Yeezy shoes and a cool car. They don't own me. I don't let them determine my life. Those are just things that I enjoy. I still focus on the small things that matter: brushing my teeth, making my bed, organizing my stuff, making genuine connections with people. That's actually the reason that I've become successful. Because I've been able to be trusted with brushing my teeth, I've been able to be trusted that these shoes aren't going to lure me and make me feel like I'm better than anybody else. I'm no better than anybody else. That's why I said I still deal with anxiety. But it started small decisions. And it's still small decisions to get me to the goals that I'm going to now. They just look different.
Right, so it's just one piece at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah, you know, next year I'm starting a farm, 20 acres, industrial hemp. I'm a huge believer in CBD. It helps my anxiety 1,000%. And I would much rather be on CBD with no THC in it. Of course, I'm not a big THC person on a recreational level. But it made me want to start a farm. And so now I'm microprocessing into what it takes to start my farm. Once I start my farm, then I microprocess through managing the farm and putting players in place to keep the farm going as I go off and build other parts of my personal brand. So the microprocess is still there. It's just not in an 8x12 with one other person. It's now in Texas on video being interviewed. You know, it's 200 days on the road as a speaker, and how I'm going to use the time that I'm spending helping other people to build a vision that helps more people. And because that's the whole thing for me. People. If you saw my vision board, people in the middle, different sectors of brands that I'm looking to build and how they all circle back to people. Has to be. If I make it about myself, I'll self-destruct. I'll go self-centered, self-seeking, shame, guilt, anxiety, depression, isolation, and I will relapse and I will go back into a hole. I know it.
Wow. And so when you're talking about it, it's such a powerful story. I mean, to go from brushing your teeth to move over here and the principles you're talking about. I mean, when I hear you talk, Tony, you're saying, I live by a set of principles. And those principles lead me and guide me in my life. And if I stick to those principles, whether it's in a jail cell or whether it's in treatment or whether it's in business, that's what's going to make me successful.
That's right.
And for a lot of people, that was so counterintuitive to them, because many of us think, well, I'll start acting smart when I've got the millions, right? When I'm successful, that's when I'll start doing it all.
You can't have one without the other.
And you're saying
That's why the lottery is a curse for most people, because they haven't processed themselves into a position where they can be trusted with much. They weren't trusted with the little. They went and got lucky at the lottery, and what happened? They spent all of their fortune in the first 3 years. And then what? More shame, more guilt, more depression than they've ever felt, because they had the world and they lost it. Not because of their luck, not because they didn't deserve it, because the small mindset, the decisions in the mindset leading up to that moment weren't in place. That's why treatment centers like this are the best place a person could be. Because you have an ability to start over, start small, and be around a group of individuals that can guide you in what that looks like. I think what we do, though, is we say, I can't trust you. I can't trust her. I can't trust him.
Right.
The only reason you do that is because you've built a belief system that says, my parents didn't trust, I couldn't trust my parents, I couldn't trust my teachers, I couldn't trust my uncle, my aunt, or whoever it was. And if I couldn't trust them, then why can I trust somebody I don't know? That belief system is a cancer, and it will stop you from getting over whatever hurdle it is. It'll keep you in active addiction. It'll keep you unsuccessful, whatever it is, until you learn to let other people guide you and just believe that somebody might care. You'll never change. But if you believe that somebody cares, you may take that information and take it as the final word. If it becomes the final word, then what? You do the suggestions. When you take suggestions that aren't your own, you find out, oh, life does get better. Oh, I can deal with my anxiety or my depression or the sexual abuse that I had when I was a young kid or a teenager or whatever it was, you know? But until then, you chase your tail.
When you're talking about that, and you mentioned a couple of things that, if I can jump in on them, because I think they're great points for our clients to hear and everyone else to hear.
Yeah.
The one was get into therapy and deal with sexual abuse. For men, I think that's one of the hardest things to do in the universe. They come in, and it's usually so much late in the game before they even want to talk about it, much less deal with it.
Right.
Do you have any advice for men that have gone through that? Women too, of course, but
Right,
sometimes
but I think the men have
so much more underreported.
The men, I think, the women have shame and guilt, but I think the men maybe have it more in some cases, because I'm a man. Why did I let that happen to me? Why didn't I stop it? I'm supposed to be a man. I can't admit this. Men don't let this happen. I went to an NA campout last year, and I was absolutely shocked at this game that we played called Cross the Line. And it was, have you ever, or has somebody ever, and if you did, or it did happen, you walked across the side. When they said, have you ever been raped? And this is a men's campout. I was shocked how many men walked across the line. I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood. Those types of things necessarily don't happen. They do happen, but now I'm seeing the reality of what young men have experienced. But by them dropping their ego and those fears and saying, you know what, this happened to me, that gives you the ability to start healing. And that's where the miracle is. When you can say, you know what, it's better for me to release this and give it to somebody so I can move forward than it is to hold on to it and pretend that it never happened. The day that you can say, take it, because I can't hold it anymore, that becomes the day that you now have power behind that experience. By being homeless, it became power in my life when I accepted that I'm different, I'm an addict. And because of that, it led me to the streets, but that's okay. I'm now going to talk about it, and now I have power. It's not a secret. Anything that happens to me, I give it away, because if it's a secret, it has power over you.
Takes us over.
As long as you have a secret, it has power over you. When you release that, you now have power over your secret. And now somebody can come in and give you the suggestions, and you can take those suggestions, and you walk in freedom, no longer in restraint.
When you, I'm going to jump back a little bit, when you were talking about making those changes in your life, I hear a lot of people say sometimes that God's against them, or God is hurting them, or why is that? When you made those changes, did you go through an experience like that? or was it almost immediate? I'm going to go and I need to shift all these different things in my life, and I'm going to make a difference.
I had a sudden spiritual epiphany, January 21st, 2007, and so for me it was a sudden.
It was like that.
Like that. Light switch went on, and I said, "Oh, I need to change directions now. I'm going that way." So I didn't. There's no difference between a sudden epiphany and those who work spiritual principles or set a guide of principles until that miracle happens. I think that they both lead us to the same place, but we can't look at one as better than the other. Mm-hmm. For me, it was a sudden epiphany, and I didn't have that, God doesn't want me to do this. It was a sudden realization that God's grace was so significant and so loving, and I was so deserving of that He didn't want me to lose. The power greater than myself doesn't want me to lose. I won't lose. As long as I stay in tune with my microprocess and a spiritual frequency, I win every time. I don't care if the goal that I set doesn't happen. It just means that I'm supposed to go all the way up to the dead end, and I have to change directions to get to what He thinks is really what I need. And when I get there, I'm like, oh, dude, this was so much better than I visioned. But somebody that may not understand that you're not supposed to lose, they may say, God's not going to do this for me. Why would He do this? All of this bad stuff has happened. That's where you have faith over fear. You just have to push through faith. You just have to have a team around you. This is the most important part of recovery, a team around you that can bring you a water bottle, bring you a Cliff Bar while you're running the Ironman. Because if you don't take what they have, you run out of energy. And when you run out of energy, you drop out of the race. You have to have a team around you. And that team around you is the one that says, keep going. It's okay. It's going to work. If you just keep going, just give it time. The backpack gets lighter. The further you go, the deeper you digest yourself, the lighter that backpack gets.
Tony, you have an amazing message, and it's helping a lot of people. How can they continue to follow you, learn more about you?
Cool. Yeah, they can follow me on Instagram at Tony M. Hoffman, Facebook, Tony Hoffman Speaking. I have a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcast app called One Choice. You can just search my name, Tony Hoffman, or One Choice, and you'll see I drop a podcast every week. 1 week is motivational, it's about perspective and mindset, how I went from a prison cell to the Olympics and being a successful entrepreneur. The other one's called Trading War Stories, where it's kind of a collaborative piece with my friend who's also in recovery, and we talk about the crazy stories that substance use took it to, not to glorify the past, but we talk about recovery and some of the crazy stuff, and it's entertaining. A lot of people love that part. So those 3 segments are probably the best ways to find me besides my website, TonyHoffmanSpeaking.com.
All right, Tony. Thank you for being on our show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yep.